Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Delery, welcome to this hearing. You know, like Senator Lee, I'm an alumnus of the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice has a long and bipartisan tradition of staying out of politics, of defending the law and the Constitution, and not acting simply as a partisan arm of whatever president happens to be in the White House. My concerns about the Obama Justice Department have been expressed in many fora, that I believe the Department of Justice has violated that tradition of staying out of politics. And indeed, I think it's been even worse. The Department of Justice has an obligation to defend the Constitution, and this Justice Department, instead of defending the Constitution, has consistently violated the constitutional rights of American citizens, has treated the Bill of Rights, unfortunately, with contempt. Now, there's been a lot of discussion at this hearing already about Operation Choke Point. I think Operation Choke Point is an abuse of power. It is an abuse of power that undermines the integrity of the Department of Justice. Operation Choke Point was proposed in a memorandum on November 5th, 2012, that was directed to you. That memorandum laid out that banks are sensitive to the risk of civil and criminal liability and regulatory action. That is certainly true. The government has a great deal of power, and apparently the Department of Justice found it encouraging that you could use that power to force the banks to do what? If prior experience is a guide, that memorandum went on to say, we can expect the bank to scrutinize immediately its relationships with third-party payment processors and fraudulent merchants, and if appropriate, to take necessary action. Now, my understanding is you personally approved that memorandum on January 10th, 2013, and you signed off on the first round of subpoenas on February 15th, 2013. Now, included among those targets were lawful sellers of firearms and lawful sellers of ammunition. The object of Operation Choke Point was to cut off the lines of credit, cut off the banking resources, cut off the financial resources to lawful small businesses engaged in the exercise of constitutional rights and selling lawful firearms. Mr. Delery, what legal authority did you have to authorize an action trying to drive out of business lawful small businesses exercising their constitutional rights?
Senator, that is not what Operation Choke Point was intended to do, and I think as clear from the proposal memo that you mentioned, Operation Choke Point was developed by career lawyers to focus solely and squarely on fraud in the payment system that was victimizing consumers of all kinds. It was not targeted at lawful businesses of any kind.
Mr. Delery, on the list of high-risk activities, ammunition sales and firearms sales are included. Is there any indication that ammunition sales or firearms sales constitute fraud?
No, absolutely. And we did not view involvement with any particular industry as lawful business as evidence of fraud. That was not what these cases were about.
Then why were firearms dealers targeted?
Respectfully, Senator, firearms dealers were not targeted, and that's something that the Office of Professional Responsibilities investigation confirmed. That was my understanding at the time, and it's
well, let's talk about some specific examples. T.R. Lerbetti, owner of Top Gun's Firearm Training and Supply in Miami, Florida, lost his bank account with Bank United. The bank candidly acknowledged that the measure was taken solely because of, quote, your company's line of business. Did the Department of Justice have any indication that Top Gun Firearms was violating any federal law?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that particular enterprise.
All right, let's try another one. Black Rifle Armory in Henderson, Nevada, lost access to its bank account for 1 month as examiners inspected their online transaction for suspicious activity. Did you have any indication that Black Rifle Armory was conducting any illegal conduct?
Senator, what I confirmed was that none of our cases involved firearms dealers of any kind, and that's something that the OPR investigation has also confirmed. These reports may confuse...
When you say none of the cases, are you saying none of the subpoenas? I'm curious what that word cases means.
It's a good point, Senator. None of the investigations, whether they became...
No, but hold on. The memo...
Subpoenas, investigations...
But, sir, the memo laid out very candidly. I'm not surprised that your criminal investigations didn't involve firearms dealers. They weren't violating the law. You couldn't investigate them or prosecuting them because they were violating the law. Choke point was all about using government power to intimidate banks to cut off their money, even though they weren't violating the laws. Did the subpoenas target firearm dealers?
No, they didn't, Senator. None of the evidence of fraud that we had that led to the issuance of the subpoenas
But this wasn't targeted on evidence of fraud. This was targeted based on an antipathy of the Obama Justice Department to the exercise of the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms by American citizens. Bank of America, for example, terminated the 12-year account at McMillan Group International, a Phoenix gun manufacturer. Shortly thereafter, owner McMillan discovered that thousands of his customers, gun retailers primarily, were also losing access to their banking services. Were you aware that gun retailers across the country were having their credit cut off by Operation Choke Point?
That was certainly not the department's goal in these investigations. When issues...
But Mr. Delery, I asked a different question. I didn't ask what your goal was. I asked, were you aware that gun retailers were having their credit lines and finances cut off?
I did learn of reports along the lines of the ones that you described, and I did a couple of things in response to that. I think, as a result, that it appears that these reports may confuse the department's cases with activities of other government agencies. But when the issues first arose, I confirmed with our team that none of their activities had related to attempting to dissuade officials or bank officials from doing business with any type of merchants, and that none of them involve firearms dealers.
You know, and
we also clarified that publicly.
Another example, Mark Cohen, who's the owner of Massachusetts gun retailer Powderhorn Outfitters, was refused a line of credit by his bank of 20 years. The bank manager admitted that Cohen's, quote, credit history is great, but he insisted the bank could no longer do business with him because you sell guns. Now, your justification, you know, it was another part of the Obama administration that was targeting the exercise of Second Amendment rights. We at the Department of Justice, we're just the lawyers. That is not, in my view, an acceptable justification. When you signed off on Operation Choke Point, the Department of Justice should not be abusing its power, trying to bankrupt American citizens for exercising their constitutional rights.
I certainly agree with that, Senator, and that's why the goal and execution of Operation Choke Point was focused solely and squarely on fraud. As I certainly feel that the Second Amendment constitutional rights, like all of the other constitutional rights, are critically important. And that's why Heller and decisions under it as established law have formed the bedrock of the positions of the Civil Division during my time there and since then.
But you're aware of no evidence whatsoever that any of the companies I mentioned committed fraud, that there was any evidence of any criminal activity whatsoever. Indeed, the only thing about them was they believed in the Second Amendment, were exercising their rights. Is that correct?
Well, Senator, I'm not familiar with the particular institutions that you described, or even whether that was the statements that you're referencing attributed any action to the Department of Justice.
See, now I'm curious, because when I asked you if firearms dealers had been targeted and you were aware, you said, yes, I became aware and I studied it. So if you studied it, how come you're not aware of these examples? If it really was a concern, I'm going to confess, I don't believe you when you say it was a concern. It was the stated intention of Operation Choke Point, and it carried out exactly its stated intention. It listed gun dealers and ammunition dealers as among the targets. And in the law, we assume that people intend to achieve the obvious results of their conduct. The fact that you're unfamiliar with any of these examples suggests that whatever examination you engaged in wasn't very serious, because if your story is right that you had inadvertently targeted constitutional rights, I would think you would treat it as a serious obligation I'm curious, did you go and apologize to any American citizen, any small business owner whose rights were targeted for exercising the Bill of Rights?
Certainly, Senator, that what we did when these concerns were raised was engage with organizations representing the financial industry to make clear what we were and were not doing, and publicly that there's no reason for financial institutions, banks, to stop doing business with lawful merchants of any kind based on our activity.
My final question, because my time has expired, but I would like you to answer the question that I just asked. Did you apologize to any American citizen, to any small business owner, for violating their constitutional rights to keep and bear arms?
Senator, what we did was make clear what our policy was and wasn't, and where we received particular inquiries about particular institutions, including through some of your colleagues, in reference to their constituents, we responded to those.
Okay, Mr. Delery, you and I are both trained lawyers. My question was, did you apologize to them? The answer is either yes or no. Either yes, you apologized to them, or no, you did not. I think this committee would be interested in knowing the answer to that question.
I have not met with individual organizations like the ones that you described.
So you have not apologized to any individual citizen or any small business owner for violating their right to keep and bear arms?
What I have said is that based on the information that I had at the time, that was not what happened as a result of the department's activities, and that's the conclusion also of the Office of Professional Responsibility. Nevertheless, given the concerns that were raised, which I do take very seriously, I made sure that we were doing what we could, including through a statement of the Attorney General, that we were conveying clearly what our policy was and wasn't, what our activities did or didn't involve in it, which seemed like.
Do you know if any of these gun retailers have had their lines of credits reinstated?
Senator, I don't, or what the, in the examples that you described, what the source of the reason was, including whether it was a decision made by the banks. I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.